from the time that we started, one of our key findings has been that there is a huge shift in terms of sustainability and social responsibility. And now there are a lot of investors, there are fund managers who are looking at it absolutely carefully when they actually decide to invest in an organization in any form or manner. And the markets are also actually getting very, very interested. So what does this really mean? And when Vinay and I connected some days back, we started this discussion saying that can ESG, can environment, social and governance issues be more than just nice statements that organizations and CEOs actually end up making? Can it be more than PR? And what does it mean for it to be more than PR? How do employees, how do customers, how do suppliers actually transform? And how do these journeys transform into becoming cultural within an organization? And I have two wonderful speakers with me. Lloyd Mathias is a business strategist and angel investor, and he's been working with HP, Motorola, PepsiCo, iconic organizations. And Vinay Dixit is a turnaround expert. He's worked previously with General Motors, McKinsey, and Electrolux. Vinay, I want to understand your thoughts in terms of how do large companies actually enable ESG within the organization and make it more than just a term?
Yeah, thanks, Namrata, and great to be part of this, this webinar. This is a topic which is very close to my heart. But, you know, it started as a passion towards women empowerment. And, you know, a bunch of IIMA alumni, I think it was a batch of 78, started this impact, which is about girl-child education. So we started supporting 4 schools there, and now, you know, that has scaled up to 2,500 schools all over India, teaching more than 1 lakh girls in the poorest of villages in India. And as part of, you know, large organizations like General Motors, Electrolux, etc., I found that, you know, a large number of CEOs, not just these companies, but many other companies, you know, they come up with these, you know, grandiose statements around purpose and, you know, this is the reason of being of our company and of our brands. But then when you start looking at the next step of how do you operationalize it, does it percolate down into the culture of the organization, you find, you know, gaping holes there. And as an example, you know, many companies talk about gender equality as a topic. But then you go and check, and if you talk to them about, you know, does it go anything beyond just recruitment of women in the organization? Does it go into compensation parity? Does it get into senior level management positions? You know, you find that, you know, it kind of rings hollow. So, so I started, you know, studying this a little bit more in detail, and with the purpose of how do you take this purpose and then translate it into the culture of the organization. And so, you know, I'll offer maybe 3 suggestions of, you know, how this can, you know, be relevant. And certainly with the startups, because, you know, startups are fighting 10 battles every day. And, you know, to lump this on top of their almost existence, which is at stake, you know, can seem to be, you know, too onerous. But you, like Namrata was saying, if you build it into the structure and the culture of the organization, it can really go on to do great things. And there are examples of startups where if these have not been thought through, they get into all kinds of mess. Big, you know, recent examples are WeWork, where we've heard so much about the culture of that, or the negative culture of the company. Uber, you know, companies like, you know, large successful startups, but with huge problems there. So the 3 things that I'd like to offer, and if I can, you know, share my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay, so the first one is, you know, the biggest challenge is, oh, where do I start? You know, yes, I'm interested in ESG topic, but where do I start? So I think the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board has got a very nice, easy to use, they call it materiality map. So depending on which industry you are part of, you can just go there and see which are the dimensions that you should be looking at in your business. So as an example, if I look at food and beverage, and of course, alcoholic beverage just naturally tops the mind. You look at, there are four or five of these dimensions that they recommend that you should look at when it comes to, ESG related. So it gives a good starting point to, to this, including ESG as part of your culture. So that's one. Then if you look at, a little bit more, and Namrata, you talked about the larger organizations. What we have done in the past is through what we call the balanced scorecards, right? So balanced scorecard, it was started by Dr. Kaplan, almost 30 years ago. And basically, the purpose, vision, and strategy is set up. And the thesis of a balanced scorecard is that you develop a capable organization which develops efficient processes, which delight consumers and customers, which leads to financial success. So this becomes a virtuous cycle, which can really help the companies, startups think through this and then apply it, in their journey from at an early stage itself. And the third thing I would say is really, as startups, it can be very useful to think about the membership of your board. Seasoned players who have been passionate about ESG related matters, if you include one or two of them on your boards, they can be the sounding board for your thoughts, as well as be the conscience of the company and keep guiding you in an ongoing way on how to really support ESG related matters. So those three things, use the materiality map, the balanced scorecard, and the right composition of the board can really help both the well-established companies as well as startups in how to operationalize ESG in their day-to-day working.
Fabulous, Vinay. Thanks so much for this. This is very useful. And especially for people who are starting out, the SASB framework gives a very good, perspective. But there are other frameworks as well. For instance, if you want to take out a sustainability report, there is a GRI framework. There is something known as a social return on investment that companies do when they're actually making investments, large investments in projects for communities. Then there is something known as natural capital accounting. Now, natural capital accounting has suddenly picked up in a very big way, which basically says that, how do you account for the impact on the environment, which is water, which is biodiversity, the entire ecosystem that you could be impacting or taking resources from. And there are a whole bunch of these tools and processes that people need to look at. But when it comes to startups, when you're starting a business model, the most important thing, and the question really is for you, Lloyd, is that, people are really looking at where can I make that extra buck? How is it that I can cut cost? How is it that I can be better than my competitor? And sometimes these things may actually not, they may feature in when you are starting an organization, but later on, when it actually comes to the crunch, you may not necessarily be willing to make that investment. And the other most important thing really is that technology provides you the ability to scale, and you can scale at in an exponential manner. Now, the problem with sustainability is that you can't really look at, when you're scaling that fast, if you look at it in a post facto process, so you could already have destroyed the ecosystem, right? You can't hotfix a sustainable process suddenly after you've caused a significant amount of damage. So what is it that startups need to do in terms of figuring out what they need to do, when they need to do, and how they should actually look at ESG related issues?
Thanks, Namrata. And, I think Vinay provided an excellent framework. My experience again has been mostly with larger companies, barring for the last couple of years. And just to take off a bit from, Vinay's framework and what you just said, Namrata, I think some of the, some of the advantages, for startups is the possibility of building, the environmental, social, and governance into the very fabric of the startup at the early stage. A lot of large organizations had to kind of go back and rewrite this into their goals. And very typically, a lot of this became a bit of a force fit, right? So it's pretty common in large organizations when we get this one day off and we all go and plant a few trees and come back feeling happy and lots of social media shares. I think in the whole startup ecosystem, given that companies are in very early stages, I think they can recognize and build a lot of these ESGs into their very DNA. And I think the important aspect to remember, and something that I see in a lot of early stage companies, is to recognize that a lot of this kind of sustainability is not just a nice to do. I think it's very important. But most importantly, it's also something that will actually help your business in the long run. So in a sense, a lot of, kind of building sustainability in a sense is a profitable pro business model. So I think that's important to understand. You have to recognize that just making a profit is not just differentiating. I think very often it's also making a difference to society. So therefore, it's easier to build in a startup where there's not much of a legacy, not much of baggage. Also, if you look at a lot of new age consumers, you're talking of the younger lot, the digital natives or Gen Z or millennials, I think they value a lot of companies that go beyond paying lip service to ESG goals. Right? For them, they recognize that a company that's doing something out of slightly more genuine intent, or it's building it into its DNA as opposed to a kind of post facto, add-on to it. And like I said, it's smart in terms of cost, it's smart in terms of profitability. It also, to my mind, does build resilience. And something, let's say, I've seen in the last 6 months since the pandemic has struck, there have been a bunch of early stage companies that have been kind of, caught like a deer in the headlights, right? They took the first month just to absorb the shock of what's happening, and then took a while to slowly turn things around. Whereas companies that had kind of defined a slightly larger purpose, that had looked at their employees as more than just people working for them, but looking at taking care of them, I think they've been able to adapt themselves much better, over the course of the last few months. So in a sense, the moment you build clear social governance, environmental goals, you're actually building a more thoughtful, resilient, and a more solid organization. I just move one step back and kind of therefore look at it both in terms of large and small organizations and early stage organizations, is really going back into understanding why does your business exist, right? I think the one obvious thing that we all learned is making profit. But we have to understand that making profit isn't very differentiating, right? That's in a sense a must do, right? Delivering the best product and service isn't really a purpose either. It is important, but that's not the core purpose. I think your purpose has to demonstrate how your business and your brand improves people's lives, right? And therefore, your brand has to therefore speak, and your business has to speak for more than what its product and services offer, but also in terms of the kind of impact it's making to society at large. And I think these are aspects that startups can take into cognizance in the early stage. They don't have to be a post facto correction. They don't have to be a scurry around and try and fix it. As you just said, Namrata. I think this is something that's much easier to do. And the last 6 months of the pandemic, in a sense, have taught us a lot of the advantages of actually building this into an organization's DNA. So that's really, my kind of initial thoughts on this.
And my takeaway from this is very interesting. You said that brand purpose needs to actually go deeper than just the advertising that you're doing, that, we stand for X, Y, Z, whatever. But my big question is, to some extent, both you and Vinay have really talked about governance issues. How do we handle the environmental issues? Like green supply chains. How do you actually create a green supply chain? So at one level, if you're a manufacturer, you're talking about taking products from someplace. And for example, you could say that I'm only going to use materials that are biodegradable. But then the minute I start shipping things around from one country to the other country and so on, and that's the problem that fashion is facing, that no matter what you do, if you use cotton or you use polyester fiber, the minute you ship things around from one country to the other, carbon emissions actually go through the roof. So at the core of it, what exactly is meant by being environmentally responsible? Because one can do the post facto thing, as you just mentioned, that plant a few trees, or say that X% of my profits will go into a particular cause, or my advertising budget will now be spent in social causes. We can do all that. But what is it that we can do in terms of bringing in hard facts into our supply chains that actually make them green?
Namrata, I have one more question for all three of you, and I'm trying to represent the startups. So the first question is, why should I, as an entrepreneur, even think of ESG, right? So, yes, how do I generate that passion in young minds is probably where I'm coming from, because Lloyd tried to answer that question and he said that the brand should start for purpose. Your purpose should be, to provide well-being and so on and so forth. But where does that passion get generated? And two, if that passion gets generated, can you share any examples of how something like this can be actually built into the DNA of a startup?
Yeah. So maybe I'll take a first crack at it. Frankly, Salil, I don't think we need to build that passion. I think the younger generation are much more mature. They're much more thinking about these things than we did. I'm a guest lecturer at a couple of the colleges. And when I go and talk to them about product or marketing, the kind of questions that the younger generation is asking about, what is the deeper purpose of the organization? Why should I buy your product? What, those kind of things, they are ahead of us. So frankly, I don't think that the youngsters need to be taught, that topic. The other thing I would say is, you've got to think about some of these things not as a cost, but as a benefit. And let me give you an example. I spend a lot of time in automotive, right? And automotive industries spend a large amount of money, time, effort in using a lot of recyclable materials. And when you do that, yes, there is a certain increase in the cost of the product. But no consumer, while everyone talks about it, but no consumer is willing to pay $1 extra because, you have, got, 5% more recyclable materials. But when the conversation changed from recyclable materials to better fuel efficient engines, and therefore they're using a lot less gas, and therefore there's an economic value to the end consumer, that's when the whole thing shifted. For that, the consumer is willing to pay 5%, 7% of a very high value item to the companies. So really the job that a lot of startups and companies can do is really think through this and work out the areas in which they should focus, whether it is energy efficiency, whether it is water efficiency, these kind of elements which give this benefit. Another industry which has done it very well is appliance industry, like air conditioners. You see 5-star rated appliances are being, charged a much higher amount, and consumers are willing to pay for those items. So those two things I would say to answer your two questions.
Lloyd, you're on.
Yeah. If I could, just kind of, dig a little deeper into some of the points Vinay made, Salil, to your question. I think it's also the ability to, take a very clear stand. I'll just give you a couple of examples. I recognize that for all businesses, it's not about running a philanthropy, right? So in every aspect, there will be some comparison of costs. Does it make sense to do, let's say, the most sustainable option if it comes at a huge increase in costs? And very many businesses will perforce, given the competitive situation, have to say no to it. So I don't think there'll be one kind of consistent answer all across. My belief is that companies will have to look at it at every level, but directionally always move to something that's long-term sustainable. I'll just illustrate with a couple of examples. I would say, again, using this pandemic as an example, in many markets, Nike goes out of its way to hire people in their stores or the shop salesmen who have a strong fitness background. Obviously, there's a clear fit. But for them, it's also a larger purpose. And they constantly invest in upgrading a lot of these people to become fitness enthusiasts and to be, as great, as skilled as full-time physical trainers. Right? Now, when this pandemic struck and physical stores across most parts of the world were shut, a lot of Nike store salesmen were encouraged to kind of conduct online classes and get, their regular buyers to actually take in physical instruction or, fitness courses, fitness lessons, right? So there was a clear advantage, right? So yes, a company that kind of believed in its core philosophy of spreading fitness that was able to come to it. I would say companies at various stages can do it. Just the belief is that for startups, very often it's more than just a statement. Very often it works. I can think of one more example, and relatively controversial as it was. About a year back, Zomato had this incident where someone, was getting some food delivered, a vegetarian item, and he found that the delivery boy belonged to a certain community, not appropriate, so he cancelled his order. And then, a day later, the founder of Zomato, Dipinder, he kind of went out on social media and said, look, we stand by our employee, right? Our business is food, our religion is food. It doesn't matter if the delivery boy comes from one section of society or the other. I think it's moments like these that not just are a tent pole in terms of what the company stands for. I think they make a larger statement to society. And if businesses believe that it's not just about making profit and increasing shareholder return, the financial shareholder return, but it's about improving and participating in the larger society, I think that is what the ultimate goal has to be.
So are business models going to change then? Are we going to see new kinds of startups emerging? Are we going to see companies set up completely separate divisions that are going to look at something like this? Because look at the top things that an organization needs to do. Number one, they need to look at the carbon footprint, and that's a very big priority right now. So to my mind, does that mean that we're going to look at more decentralized businesses? The traditional FMCG business was that, or any other business was that you produce in one place and then you distribute everywhere else. Are we going to look at decentralization? Are we going to look at business models and social businesses? So it's a business, yes, but the benefits of that business go to society at large and perhaps are co-owned. Are these things likely to happen, or do you think that this is just blue sky thinking, perhaps not necessarily we're going to go back to business as usual in another 6 months?
If I may take a stab at it, Namrata, I think these things effectively can't be siloed, right? They might start as paying a little lip service or ticking a box or producing the annual corporate sustainability report because it looks good and it ticks a box in the in the to-do list. But I think a deeper integration is desirable, and it's also going to be more beneficial, right? For the simple reason that purpose and profit are interlinked, right? And purpose will therefore have to be part of a longer term strategy. And this interlinking will happen only if it becomes an integral part of, it becomes a driver of what the company seeks. So in a simple context, we look at reducing waste as one element, right? How does a company kind of reduce and eliminate waste? I think it'll have to look beyond the physical parameters of raw material procurement and green procurement. It'll also look at reducing weight all across, right? From the communication ecosystem, from the travel policies of the company where people are taking a flight at the drop of a hat. So I think unless it kind of becomes all pervasive and until it becomes a slightly more kind of genuine call to action, the short-term lip service won't work. And increasingly, and the world's largest private equity, Blackstone, has actually talked of the fact that a lot of their investments are going to be directed at companies that take ESG seriously. Right? How soon this will materialize in real terms, may be yet to be seen. But I think directionally, that's the way smarter companies will move.
Yeah, let me just add to that. I fully agree with that. In fact, I feel that creating a separate division is the first test, which in my mind, the companies will fail if they are trying to percolate purpose into a whole culture of the organization. Then it becomes someone else's problem. It does not become, the culture of the company. Now, the other question that keeps coming up, is this a cost? And actually, a lot of studies have been done, and, there are large number of these available online. One study was done in 2015-16 which studied about 2,200 companies, their investments in ESG, and tried to work out what kind of returns they were getting. And the overwhelming feedback analysis showed that 7-1, the investment in ESG was providing effective returns to the companies. So it is not just a, feel good kind of a thing. It makes business sense to do it. So that's one. The other one is, and Lloyd mentioned about BlackRock, and, there's so many cases where the investors are clearly calling out, that they are going to invest in businesses which have good ESG foundations, and actually they're going to exit certain businesses. For example, tobacco, liquor, airline, some of these businesses, they are actively getting out of. So the investors are starting to look at the negative externalities of the business to decide where they're going to put their monies. So that's the second one. And the third one, and it's a new development, is there's a movement happening which is trying to create what is being called a long-term stock exchange. And because there's a feeling now in the business circles that this move towards quarterly announcements and results is bringing about so much of short-term thinking in organizations at every level, right down to the salesman who's trying to achieve his monthly target so that quarterly target can be met. So this is talking about looking at 10-year sort of performances of the companies, and only those companies will be traded on this LTSE. So this is a new development which is just starting up now, and actually companies will have to bid to be part of that LTSE, because it is expected that the cost of capital, if you are able to access that large pool of ESG and impact investing funds, can be lower than if you went out in the public markets. So I think there are some of these large scale changes which we should expect in the next few years to come.
And most of them are really very exciting changes, because in India, we are also talking about the social stock exchange being set up now. Yeah. But my question is that, see, in the past few years, in the past 6 months, the digital acceleration that we've seen in the last few years has just accelerated. So there's been a digital acceleration. There's been an acceleration around sustainability issues as well. And so where do they converge? So I was speaking to somebody and they said something very interesting. They said that IoT is going to play an extremely important role in making us into a circular economy, which basically means that the products that are manufactured will have IoT chips. They'll be able to send out data, receive data, and we will be able to figure out, okay, where is a particular product and who does it need to go to for it to be recycled. The second thing that they said was that our natural resources, such as our water systems, our trees, the air that we breathe, all these things can be measured by IoT in any case. So a large scale deployment of IoT to protect the natural ecosystem is also going to be there. So are there new models like this that are going to emerge, which are at the intersection of sustainability and technology?
I think the biggest benefit I see of IoT is twofold. Number one is increased capacity utilization of that asset. Today, I'll give you an example. Every home has a washing machine now, right? And if you look at the period of time for which a washing machine is used, it's a fraction of the day when it is used, right? And so you've got, in an apartment block of, let's say, 200 apartments, you've got 200 machines, which with all the material which has gone into produce those, to ship those, and to use those, and they're being used 10% of the time, right? I mean, you start thinking about it, and it feels inhuman that how much material and raw materials we are wasting, So new business models are coming up where companies are setting up washing as a service. So 10 of those homes become the sort of the washers of the building, or so that you take out 100 washing machines and just 10 can make things happen for all the people who are living there. That's one.
Vinay, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Just tell the people who have joined us, if they have any questions, they can please put it on chat. We have about 10 more minutes, so please carry on.
Sure. So that is one example. The other example is today's products are hugely over-engineered. I'll give the example of the same washing machine. You go to a washing machine, or you look at a microwave oven, there are 200 programs in that, right? And you think about what the normal behavior is. You go put your clothes in and press a start button, frankly, right? And maybe there is once in a year situation where if you're using it on silks or woolen, you sort of change it. But the company has spent tremendous amount of R&D, cost, electronics, so much into giving that functionality which is not getting used. But the problem was that in a non-IoT situation, the companies never knew which programs were not getting used. Now, once the IoT option comes in, the companies will know very well, which programs are getting used, and therefore they can make sure those are offered and the cost is taken out from the rest. A classic case is Tesla, right? Tesla knows, how the car is being driven, for, in which neighborhoods, autonomous driving is being, used more. How does it, go to the gas station, and how do you, guide the car to the gas station which has got the best, gas prices in the US. So a lot of these, opportunities will come up through IoT of reducing the use of material and improving the efficiency of usage of the product.
So that's leads me to a conundrum. So at one level, we are saying that because we want material efficiencies, we're going to end up using a lot more of IoT. But then we're giving up a lot of our data to the organization that is actually going to be collecting it. And there are governance issues around that. And that's a very important topic in terms of in ESG parameters. How would that be addressed then?
If I could just step in, Namrata, I think, one is just to add to the technology. I believe technology will, ultimately kind of make a paradigm shift, right? So the whole concept of the shared economy, right? The Airbnb. So all of these, in a sense of, electric vehicles, autonomous cars, I think all of these, in a sense, are actually sweating assets better. And therefore, in a global context, reducing, let's say the carbon footprint, right? The more shared vehicles, the more Ubers and such like that we use, could effectively, like all of us know, possibly, a car is used for about less than 2% of its entire time. So as more people possibly get into using the shared economy, that will help. Indeed, things like digital payments, working from home, using of cloud sensors. To the point you just made about the social impact. So what happens? I think this comes back into the first point, saying that if the company has, or if the organization or governments at large don't begin to use data more sensitively, respect people's privacy, which are part of larger corporate governance goals, then everything else becomes redundant. So you have to assume that there is a certain amount of goodness within the larger body, be it a government, be it an organization, be it a startup, be it an individual founder, that recognizes that the path for good business is to doing it in a very positive manner that's helpful to all, right? So therefore, gathering data, which is an integral part of IoT, and using that data purposefully and having machine algorithms improve on response times is all very good, as long as this data is not used nefariously. And I think that's again, I mean, there's no equity measure, but that's really a social indicator, and that will only come about when businesses over time start refining their core purpose.
Can I raise a very different question and take you on a slightly different track for the next minute or so? There are a lot of IT enabled or tech startups these days. So when we are talking of startups, my question is this whole subject that we are talking about relevant for tech startups also? And if I was a tech startup, what would be your recommendations for me? I have one more question from Mridul Sahu. How the shared economies will affect the demand of the shared products, and how will producers adjust to the new demand levels? So that's the second question you might want to take on that.
If I can take on the second question first, I think the shared economy, in a sense, sweats assets better, because you're looking at the same product being shared over a larger purpose. So in the long term, it's a very positive goal. I think disruption of business models is a natural outflow of that, right? So that's really, as classic capitalism, some businesses will die and some will be produced. So maybe 10 years from now, we won't be producing so many traditional cars as we do today. A lot more will, be electric, and more importantly, there'll be shared vehicles, of the Lyft and the Uber kinds, as opposed to individual owned vehicles. So in that sense, directionally, it's positive, and businesses will learn to adapt. And clearly, technology will be an accelerator as far as this goes. On the whole, to the larger question, Salil, I think, like I said, technology is a positive drive in the direction of having better ESGs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me add to that. I think that technology is forcing companies to reiterate at speed. That's what it's allowing people. So, if you think about the product development cycles, 10, 15 years ago, you would design a product to, you would take 2-3 years to design a product, launch it in the market, it would stay in the market for 5 years, and then you would have the next generation product. Typically, if you take, higher value products. Now, though, that thing has completely changed. The access to data, and again, I keep talking about access to data from a consumer point of view. There has to be a benefit to the consumer whose data you are using. If there is a somewhat equitable quid pro quo kind of arrangement, that you are taking consumer data, but you're offering better services, better products, more efficiency over time, I don't think people will worry so much about, allowing companies to use their data. It's when, that data gets accessed and, sort of goes into a black hole and gets used for all kinds of things which are really not giving consumer the benefit that he or she desires, that's when the problem comes. So I think that arrangement will need to become much more visible going forward, and technology will enable that to happen, I believe.
Sure. Vinay, and coming back to my next question, Namrata, this is for you also. Any tips for, promoters of tech startups?
I think the tech startups, when they, or any startup, whenever you're starting out, you've got to really understand the fact that, and I'm going to quote Murli here, he said something very, very interesting. He says, deep down, each one of us has to accept the planet is now inherited by us from our parents, but we have borrowed it from our children. It's a moral obligation for us to look at ESG issues and to make them part of our core DNA, not just in terms of business, but in terms of leading our lives.
Yeah. No, fully agree with that. And I think, startups, I like the fact that the younger generation startups are already thinking about it. It's just that, the reason I shared that materiality map is just to, share some resources which are available. Look at, you don't have to, get cowed down by, oh, ESG is a big thing. Okay, what is relevant for your business? Take a couple of things, do them at scale over a consistently over a period of time. If you have that kind of a thinking, rather than I do this now, next quarter I do this, next quarter I do this, that kind of mindset doesn't work in this kind of, in ESG related matters. There has to be a consistency and constancy of purpose that you go along and continue to invest behind that.
And I've learned a lot from our conversation. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I would just like to thank Vinay and Lloyd. Thank you so very much for your time, and Salil as well. Salil, any last thoughts from you, please? Feel free to add.
I'm not an expert on this subject, Namrata. I think the three of you did a great job. You know, I personally learned some very interesting things. I'm happy that you all could come together and spare the time. And thank you all for participating. I'm actually hoping that you know, all these people who have joined us have found it engaging. You know, we have one of us, one of the panelists, sorry, one of the audience saying that it was very engaging. If anybody else has positive comments, please, we'll welcome that. We will try and bring you more and more of these webinars as part of the IIMAGES platform. Our next webinar is planned around analytics and, you know, specifically AI and ML as applied to marketing. We'll try and showcase how marketing decisions get improved using AI and ML. Do join us next Friday, and thank you everyone for joining. Let me just, so Ravi, thanks for ending. Great learning, wonderful session from Shashi Sajdev. Thank you all very much. Lots of food for further thought, engaging and passionate. So thank you everyone. I'm happy that all of you enjoyed it, and hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Salil.
Have a good
Thank
weekend,
you,
everyone.
Vinay. Great,
Thank you.
Lloyd. Bye.
Bye-bye.